Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to start because we've got a lot to get through tonight. I'm Sam Everingham from Growing Families. We will record this webinar for those of you who missed bits of it. So don't worry about that. We can send you the recording afterwards. And there is a Q&A tab down the bottom to ask questions if you've got questions for speakers or panelists after the session or during it. Feel free to put those in there. We're going to cover quite a few issues tonight, which is great. Now, the first speaker I'm going to introduce to you is Melissa Stevens from IVF Australia, who's going to talk about coming to terms with the donor IVF. Melissa's worked as a fertility counsellor with IVF Australia for the past 15 years. Her current role is in providing supportive counselling to those undergoing IVF. And this includes grief and loss work, relationship counselling, coping with the ART. And she also does implications counselling for donors and intending parents who are considering psychosocial implications regarding to this area. And she manages the counselling team at IVF Australia. So she's a busy woman. Melissa, thanks for coming on. It's great to have you here. I'll let you take it away. You got to unmute yourself.
Okay, unmuted. Thanks very much, Sam, and hi, everybody. So tonight I'm going to talk through a few things to consider. Firstly, making the decision to actually move on to using a donor. I'm going to outline the emotional experience that a lot of people talk about related to using donor eggs. We'll look at how you might find a donor in Australia and then think about talking to the child about their origins, typical kind of questions that people like to think through, and just a little bit about the type of support that might be available if you need it. So as Sam said, feel free to type in any questions you might have into the chat section. So the decision to move on to using donor eggs is a really big one, and the majority of women that I speak to say that it's not something that they ever thought they'd have to consider when they thought about having their family. Firstly, they find themselves doing IVF, which is another thing that most people don't think they're going to have to do. And then they're presented with the idea of donor eggs as an option. So through this process, starting a family has become a more and more complex and emotional process for people in this position. Often the first time that donor eggs are brought up with people by their doctor or anyone else, people don't really feel at all comfortable with the idea. Generally, people say they just kind of brush it off as something they won't need to worry about or something that's not going to be for them. When people think about having their family, they usually imagine that their child is going to be genetically related to themselves and, think about things like possibly the child will look like them or like others in their family. They'll share similar traits and characteristics. And contemplating that this won't be the case often leads to a lot of sadness, and usually women experience quite significant feelings of grief and loss around this because the idea of how their family will look is potentially quite different to what they hoped it might have been. For their partner, there's often sadness around not having the child reflect the genetics of the person that they're with. And that's kind of what they assumed would happen. Having said that, I mean, genetics is a big part of children and families, but also there is a big role of nurture, and, children grow up learning values, mannerisms, all sorts of things from their parents because of the way they're raised. It's not all about genetics. I guess it's really important to acknowledge the feelings of grief and loss and give yourself some time to work through them all before moving on to the next step of using a donor. Ignoring the feelings doesn't make them go away. We all know that. And not allowing time to process the feelings can mean that later that they're quite unresolved and they might surface again when you're not expecting it, or, at a time in the future when you have to deal with it at that point. So what I've noticed is that before moving on to using donor eggs, most people need to know that they've really tried all their options with their own eggs. So they have to feel like they've given it their best shot. The last thing people want to do is kind of look back in a couple of years and go, oh, maybe we should have tried this, or, this was suggested and we didn't follow it through. So really make sure you feel quite resolved about that. You've tried everything and this is where you should be. Conversations with your doctor and looking at results from previous cycle will give you a fair indication of that being the next step for you. When you get this information and you think it's time to move to donor eggs, it's often a good time then to check in with a fertility counsellor. The reason being, you can just talk through how you're feeling about the whole process, but also they can give you some ideas on, how you might find a donor, things you might consider, things to be aware of in the future. And often people find that information really helpful. Okay. So for some people that I see, they feel like moving to donor eggs is actually quite a simple step. They sort of feel like they've resolved things and they can get to that next phase quickly. And this is influenced by a variety of factors, I suppose, how readily people accept it. Sometimes it's to do with, other health issues. Sometimes it's to do with the age they started treatment, how much treatment they've done. All sorts of things can impact on that. When people have decided to use a donor, the focus is building and raising the family as opposed to focusing on the genetic connection for your children. So people have kind of moved to that next step, think, okay, well, it would have been lovely to have children that are genetically connected to us, but what's important now is the fact that we want to have a family and we want to raise those children. So, how else can we do this? Sometimes people in that position might have also considered other ideas like adoption or fostering, and obviously there's no genetic connection there. As you're probably aware, adoption is an extremely difficult process in Australia, and using a donor egg is often a much easier way to create your family. For other people, they give the idea of donor eggs a lot of consideration. They do a lot of research, but ultimately they might decide it's actually not for them. There are some people who never become comfortable with the idea, and that's okay. They may end treatment at that point. Often what I find is from the time the idea has been floated to people that donor eggs, are a really good option for them, it can take up to about 12 months before they're actually ready and go, okay, right, we're good to go with this. We've found a donor, we're ready for treatment. So it is a bit of a process for people to go through. We notice that sometimes couples are at a different place emotionally in terms of their readiness to move forward. And the reason for that, I guess, is the individuals grieve differently and process things at different pace. So it's really important to communicate where you're up to with your partner, and each of you talk about your thoughts and concerns around the process. So, everyone's comfortable and you're moving forward as a team. I know a lot of people in the position feel like they're really under a lot of pressure to kind of move along. Sometimes it's time pressure, and that might be related to age when you're having your children. Or sometimes people are deciding whether to use a donor egg to have a second child, and they don't really want a big gap between their children. There's a whole lot of reasons around that people kind of, feel under pressure to make quick decisions. But I think it's one of those decisions you have to make at your own pace, and you'll know when you're ready and when it's right to move forward for you. To help with your decision making, it's really helpful to have all the information about the many different options that are available, and to think about the scenarios and how comfortable you might be dealing with them in the future. So I guess that's kind of a bit of the emotional background to think about. The next thing I'm going to talk about is how you might find a donor in Australia. So there are quite a few options for people. A lot of people kind of think, well, maybe it's too tricky to find someone locally. I guess the work I do, probably nearly all the egg donation work we do is with known donors. So it's definitely a good option for people to create their families. So a known donor can be either a family member, so a sister or a cousin, someone like that, a close friend, or someone in your general social network. And when I say your general social network, I mean, try and think quite broadly. So it could be a friend of a friend, a work colleague. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone that you're close to. And often it tends to be not people that they're particularly close to. So people kind of say, well, how on earth am I going to ask someone to donate eggs? That's really putting myself out there. One of the ways to do it is be a bit more general. So I suppose, having a conversation with a person and saying, oh, we've had quite a long IVF journey, and the doctors have suggested to us that the best way forward is to probably find an egg donor. So we're sort of looking into our options regarding egg donation. If that person's interested, they will go away and think about it and potentially come back to you and sort of say, oh, how you mentioned that's something I might be able to help you with. Or they might know someone. One of my favourite stories is I had a patient, and she brought her egg donor in, and I said, oh, how did you guys know each other? And it turns out she was sitting there chatting to her hairdresser, and her hairdresser said, my sister has always wanted to be an egg donor, and they ended up matching up that way. So, it's kind of, I guess, fairly random things like that tend to work for people. I've had other patients, and this obviously depends on the type of person you are and how private you are, but they've sort of put a fairly general announcement on Facebook and stuff. So it's gone out to everyone they know that they're looking for an egg donor. Would anyone know anyone, kind of thing? But all of that obviously depends on your comfort levels. The other way, if you don't have anyone in your network, is there are a number of websites in Australia that people recruit from. So there's Egg Donation Australia, Egg Donor Angels, and The Gift of Love are just a few. The way they work is you put up a profile about your story, and women who are interested in being donors have a look at those profiles and kind of get to know people. So generally it starts off people emailing each other. Then there might be some phone calls, FaceTime. If they're in the same state, people might meet at a cafe or something and just get to know each other a little bit like that. What do you put in your profile? I think you just have to be honest about your story. When I ask donors why they selected a particular person, they usually just say, oh, I read it and I just felt a connection with them. And they can't ever be much more specific than that. So it's just, I think, being true to yourself and putting what's important to you, and then the right person will potentially connect with you. You need to have some criteria in mind, I guess, about what's important to you in a donor. That might be physical things like their ethnicity, stuff like that, shared values. You don't have to say yes if you're not comfortable. I guess you have to think about this person potentially being in your life quite long term. So if someone expresses interest, you provide them with some information about the process. Are they aware they'll need to do an IVF cycle? What does that involve? Is their partner on board with the whole process? You'll need to, I guess, anything with a known donor, whether it's family and friend or someone you recruit online, it's really important that you talk about what your expectations for future contact are and have a good understanding of what that might be. So there's no right or wrong around what the contact will be. It's just that both parties have to be in full agreement. So in the case of a family or a close friend, it might be that you have regular contact and you think that'll be the same. But how will you manage information with your extended family in the friendship network? If it's someone you meet, then there are various options, like you might email each other, you might send the occasional photo, or you might just say, we won't have any contact till the child's 18, or if the child wants to reach out, is that okay? So just figuring out what's comfortable with everyone else. You also need to ask about general health, mental health, genetic conditions, find out what their motivation is. So, and also if they've donated before. So there are family limits in Australia, 5 in New South Wales and 10 in other states. And all donations need to be altruistic. So you can cover the costs associated with expenses and transport and things, but no other payments are allowed. So if you don't have anyone in your network, or you don't want to recruit online and put yourself out there, you might want a more distant connection, because some people find the whole profile and matching can be a very stressful and uncomfortable process. So the options there is asking if your clinic has a program where they recruit egg donors that you could access. Some of the clinics do. Some clinics import frozen eggs from overseas egg banks, and this allows you to choose a donor. But you can have the treatment at home with your own doctor, and also support from family and friends in a familiar environment. If you use an egg bank, you need to be aware that your child may have half siblings. So will you be able to get information about them? Generally, you're able to find out the gender and month and year of birth of half siblings created using that donor. The other option, I guess, which will be talked about a lot later, is going overseas. The next thing to consider is what you're going to tell your child about their conception. So research shows it's very important to be open and honest with children about their origins. And also children do best if they've always known their story from a very young age. So when I first started in the field, many people were quite unsure about telling their child. Now, however, the vast majority of people plan to be really open, because over recent years, there's a lot more community conversation and acceptance around IVF, donor conception. People really understand in the wider community what's going on. And most people have heard of someone doing IVF or, heard of someone using a donor. There's also a change in the way people are educated at school. So there's a lot more conversations in schools about how babies are made in sex ed class and that sort of thing. And they talk about IVF and other aspects of fertility. So when you're talking about donor conception, you need to think about it as you're just teaching that child about themselves and their family in the same way that you're teaching them a whole lot of other stuff about themselves and about their lives. So you could start the conversation with a preschool child, so 3 or 4, and it just needs to be a simple couple of sentences. So we really wanted to have a baby. We weren't able to do it on our own. So a lovely, kind lady called a donor helped us. Or you might say, oh, Auntie so-and-so helped us, or whoever it is, however you decide the story's going to work and what's comfortable for you, then that's what you tell them. So, the other thing you might do is, when people are giving babies baths, they talk to them about all sorts of stuff. So at that point, you can kind of chat to your baby about what their story was, not because the baby will understand, but because you'll get comfortable with talking about it in a really clear, easy fashion. There's also lots and lots of kids' books around now that you can order online about IVF and donor conception for all different age groups. So you can just have a couple on the shelf, every so often pull it out and go, oh, look, that's how our family started. This is a story a bit like ours. Really normalises the whole process for children. Children have quite little attention spans. So, a question arises, you answer it honestly, they're on to the next topic. They're not kind of dwelling on it. So this is an ongoing thing. It's not a serious, now sit down, we have to tell you something kind of conversation. If you're kind of tempted to put off telling them, which some people do, it sort of seems a bit harder than they thought it might be. Think about who else knows. So if quite a few of your family and friends know, you don't want them telling the child. You want the story to come directly from you in a way that you want to tell them. And I guess the other thing we're noticing now is things like Ancestry.com mean there is no secrets about genetics. If young people tested themselves in the future and that was the way they found out, then that would not be ideal. In Australia, donation is identity release. So if your child is interested, they can look for their donor in the future. Most young people I've spoken to who are looking for their donor are just looking for information. They're very clear that they have a family. They're the people at home who raise them, who love them, who look after them, and that's their family. They look at the donor more about, I want to know what they look like. I want to know if we have anything in common. I want a bit more information about their medical history, that sort of stuff. It's more sort of pieces of the puzzle rather than a relationship that they're looking for. I guess some other general questions people wonder about is sometimes people wonder if they're going to bond with their child. This is a pretty common concern with women. I guess all the women I've spoken to said in the end it's not been an issue for them. They've been there from conception. They've had the whole pregnancy. They've given birth. They're doing the day-to-day mum stuff. It 100% feels like their child. Sometimes people worry about inequality in the couple regarding genetic connection. So if the dad has the genetic connection and the mum doesn't, is that going to be problematic? And I think that's something that, couples just work through and communicate with each other about. The other thing people kind of wonder about is how do you manage random comments from strangers? Obviously, some people know that it's the child's created. Oh, I'm running out of time. Sorry, Sam. And I guess it's just, managing those comments. So, oh, the baby looks just like you, just kind of smiling and nodding and going, okay, that's fine. I'm not taking it to heart. Okay. So just in the last little minute, there is a bit of support available. I think probably your best support around this stuff is seeing a fertility counsellor at your clinic. But there are also some websites like VARTA and DC Network that have a lot of resources on them about talking to children and you know, information about donor conception. And the online websites where people recruit donors often have a bit of support as well. Quite a few of my patients have told me. So I hope you found that helpful. Feel free to send any questions through. And
Thanks,
yes,
Melissa, that's great. There's already some questions coming through already for you, so that's great.
okay.
All right, look, I'm going to now turn. So yeah, feel free to keep chatting on to Melissa online. I'm going now to turn to overseas donor options for people or clinic recruited donors here in Australia, which follows on nicely from Melissa's stuff. So I'm going to look at considerations in choosing a donor, as I said, tossing them to a clinic or going overseas. As Melissa's talked about already, you know, there's friends or family members, there's ID release donors, which can be sourced for the clinic. And if people go overseas, sometimes they source anonymous donors where no contact details are provided. But as Melissa pointed out, anonymity is not guaranteed. We also talk about something called donors experience, and that means donors who've never donated and have had no children of their own. And that might be a young donor who's doing this, you know, for the first time without their own family. There's donors who haven't donated, but they have got their own kids. And that's a common type of donor we've got here in Australia who are doing it for a friend. There's an unproven donor. That means they've donated eggs, but they haven't had any births. And then in overseas context, you've got what we call a proven donor, which means they've donated and it's led to a birth before. So using our donors who are coming from overseas is more popular for Australians just because we have a lack of donors in Australia. A lot of people who come to donor IVF are already in their late 30s or 40s, and by that stage, their own friends and networks tend to be the same age as them, and so egg quality, you know, declines after the age of 35, and so often those women haven't got a good donor up their sleeve, if you like. So overseas, donors can often be paid. There's more of them as a result, but it is more expensive. There's more paperwork, and in many instances, you don't get contact with your donor in that setting. Different countries have different rules around this. As Melissa said, in Australia, your donor must be known or ID release, but in countries like the USA, they can also be anonymous. In countries like Greece, they have to be anonymous. There usually, and the same in places like Cyprus or so forth, or South Africa. In Georgia, the donor has to be a known donor or ID release donor. So it does vary a lot depending on the cultural norms of that country. In Spain, they're also anonymous, so you won't even get photos of them in Spain or say in Greece. We do see higher, what we call live birth rates for donor IVF overseas often, and that's simply because, not because the IVF's any better overseas, simply because the average age of their donors is much lower than here in Australia. And so your success rates can be sort of 44 or 40% per cycle, versus sort of 12 to 28% here in Australia. And yeah, as I say, it's an age-related thing more than anything else. So some intending parents do choose to travel overseas for donors, and they might go over to the USA or Greece or Cyprus or Georgia. And sometimes usually the partner would go over, the male partner, to provide their sperm, or sometimes they ship their sperm overseas. The downside of traveling overseas to make embryos and do transfers is success rates are still going to be, you know, not guaranteed. You know, there might be a 28% success rate in some places for donor IVF, and so you might have to do a second or third transfer. And the issue is there, can you stay on in that country for another transfer? Are you going to leave your partner at home while you travel overseas? And the cost of travel are also a factor you've got to think of. Obviously, on the pro side, you can transfer fresh eggs in that environment, whereas the clinics that are bringing in eggs to Australia, they're frozen eggs. The costs of donor IVF overseas do vary a lot also. The USA, if you consider the cost of the donor plus making embryos in the first embryo transfer, it can be around 35,000 US, whereas it's much cheaper in places like Greece or Georgia or Cyprus, where it might be closer to sort of 5,000 or 6,000 euros for those processes. So it does mean people do go to those countries. We'll hear from women later tonight about their journeys. So a lot of clinics now do allow eggs to be shipped to Australia under certain conditions. If it's an altruistic donor who's had counselling and also agrees to contact. Obviously, the advantage of that is extra transfers of embryos are simple if the first transfer doesn't work, and you can stay with your local doctor here in Australia. The cons are these programs don't guarantee a pregnancy, let alone live birth. They can be costly, and limited clinics in Australia offer these kinds of programs. The World Egg Bank is the main program offered by most of the big clinics, and they're donors from the USA. They're mostly Caucasian donors or Hispanic donors. A lot of them on their database don't meet Australian requirements, so there's a much more limited number who do meet our requirements here. But most of the big clinics will have access to them. And you can look on their website and see the donor profiles and so forth. Two downsides of these programs are cost. I think the cheapest World Egg Bank program is around 15,600, but if you throw the IVF in and the transfer, it's up at $24,000, and that's with the a no guarantee program. You're just getting 6 eggs. They will guarantee 1 day 3 embryo for a higher price, and guarantee 2 day 5 embryos, for about $33,000. So it's big money. What you're looking for, if you're looking at these programs, is programs that guarantee you a maximum number of day 5 embryos. And for the US programs, that's hard to do. There are more cost-effective programs, and I might share a screen with you in a minute to show you a bit about this. Let me just see if I can share this because it gets a bit complicated. Let's have a look here. Okay. So I'm just going to share this screen here. So this is a company called Central IVF, and their program, as you can see from that screen, might be various programs, but might guarantee 3 or 4 day 2 or 3 embryos. We don't think that's much good, guaranteeing 2 or 3 day embryos, because you really want day 5 embryos. So these programs will often provide you with more embryos if none of them lead to a pregnancy, but you've got to read the fine print with these programs. There is maybe 1 or 2 programs that offer Asian donors in Australia. So a few of the clinics offering 1 or 2 day 5 embryos. And there's also program Overgene, for example, which offers 1 day 5 embryo, and there's I think an even better one with Manor Medical, which offers maybe 2 of these day 5 embryos. Some of you always ask me which clinics offer these overseas donor programs here in Australia. And as I said before, most of the big ones offer the World Egg Bank program. City Fertility and Monash offer the Manor program, which is coming out of Georgia, their donors particularly. And a lot of the smaller clinics will offer a program too in different states as a point of difference. As you can see from that slide, there's clinics in South Australia and WA and in Sydney, which offer some of these more cost-effective programs, particularly for those who are wanting an Asian donor, for example, or can't afford the high cost of the World Egg Bank. Unfortunately, in Victoria, the import laws are so strict that the only donors available in Victoria right now are the World Egg Bank ones, which makes it harder there. But it's said that some of the smaller providers do offer these more affordable ones. So that's the main things I wanted to talk about right now. For those of you who are in Melbourne or come into Melbourne for our June conference in 17, 18 June, that first day of that event, we'll be looking at donor issues with overseas and local donor experts, with medical talks, including one from IVF Australia and from Reparat, I think you'll hear from later today. There'll be panels of egg donors talking, Australian egg donors, I mean, parents who use donors, and probably most importantly, panels of donor conceived children, talking about when they were told, what they're thinking about having a donor as part of their lives, children egg donors. We try and make these events cover all kinds of aspects of donor IVF, so people get a really good handle on what it's going to mean for them. It is a big decision, as Melissa said, so we want to make sure that you're looking at it from all aspects and talking to the right people who can give you those options. So look, that's all I want to talk about right now until we come back to the donor panel. I'm now going to introduce you to our next speaker, who is Carolina Gonzalez. So Carolina is known for her traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture work, with promoting the road to optimum health, wellness, and supporting the path to pregnancy. She's based in Melbourne with a clinic called The Nature of Balance and Coaching. And what it does is blending science with natural remedies in the field of holistic health and healing. She's very well known for the work she does assisting women to retrieve pregnancy and nurture their journey to motherhood. We get so much interest in this topic that we do try and include something like this in each of our webinars. So Carolina, welcome. Thanks for coming on. I'm just going to try and get you to turn your, there we go. Here she is.
Hello, Sam.
Hello, thank you for coming in. I will hand over to you to talk to us about some of the recommendations you have.
Of course. Thank you for having me here tonight. Hello, Fiorina. Lovely to see you here. Well, I guess I've been doing this work for 26 years, and I see women in all different situations coming for the first consultation. And the first question that I have for them is actually knowing where they're at. So we actually take a whole look at the person. We have a look at them. I start by looking at the nutrition and by making things simple, because there's such overwhelm at this stage of the journey that my job is just to make everything simple and create a pathway for my client, for the woman in front of me, to come back to peace. So the first step is actually to help the person prioritize their health and lifestyle. To start with that, we actually just start by taking stock as to how the person's feeling and where we can actually improve well-being. We start by simple things. The first thing could just be, how much water are you drinking per day? And making sure that the person's actually increasing their hydration. We also have a look at what foods the person's actually eating and how we can improve their overall diet, how the person's actually moving, whether there's walking involved or whether the person's actually doing any yoga or any breath work, how stressed the person may be, whether they're actually in a space where they're practicing mindfulness. We have a look at all of these things because I feel that the most important thing for us to concentrate on is to nurture and come back to self-kindness and to self-love when we're actually going through a process such as this one. Some people, we actually take them through a detoxification pathway, but by the stage that they actually arrive and they're actually doing egg donor, they're well aware of all the things that have gone wrong already at this stage. And now we're just opening up a new door to enter pregnancy in the most kind way, I would say. So I use acupuncture with the person. There's a lot of talk therapy that's involved as well. And the most important thing is to bring that person back to peace. I don't know how much I would like to share this with you, but that is the most important thing, is to help the person relax and make sure that the central nervous system is taken care of. By this stage, they have engaged many different practitioners, and they've spoken to many doctors, and they are in the rhythm of knowing how to take care of themselves. But sometimes they just need that extra person to actually nurture them and walk side by side to help them with their spirit as well. So in Chinese medicine, we believe that the body needs to be taken care of through nutrition, through acupuncture, through movement, through the food that we're consuming. We also believe their emotions play a very, very big part as well. So helping the person process anxiety, fear, anything that may be trapped within the body at this particular time is very, very important as well. We do this through the use of acupuncture. We do this through the use of breath work as well. There's a lot of talk therapy that goes along with it as well. There are practical things that we do recommend, such as journaling, if the person's actually going through a lot of emotional upheaval, connecting with nature and spending time, at the local park, or going to the beach, or going to a forest, and just really allowing the body to experience relaxation. So yeah, I guess that there is a lot in this topic, and I'm so grateful to be here. So if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and ask me, and I'm here to answer them for you.
Oops, something.
Awesome.
Trying to get my video to work. Will you always do acupuncture as part of your treatment with women looking for pregnancy with donor?
Yeah, I do, because there is a lot of research that suggests that acupuncture helps with circulation, especially when we're looking for pregnancy. We want to have a lot of circulation and energy in the reproductive system area.
Yep. That makes sense. Okay. And so how many sessions are we talking about that you'd recommend?
So normally we would say 12 sessions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are they spread over, is it one a week, or is it?
We do one a week, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's a question for Kate. Right. At what stage do you tend to get women coming to you for support?
Well, it depends, because I do have a big interest in reproductive health. Mm-hmm. Most women want to come in 100 days before they actually go in for implantation, to make sure that the body has enough time for detoxification, for nourishment, and for tonifying as well. And it does take a little while for the body to come back to a place of balance. Yeah.
I mean, how much time should people spend on getting their body ready for this? Are we talking sort of a few months, or?
We would definitely recommend 3 months.
Yeah.
If possible and where possible, just the whole cycle, to give the body the best chance for it to come in the most relaxed, in the most tonified way. It gives you actually ample time. If there is a deficiency in something, like once we actually go through all the bloods, if there is a deficiency in a vitamin or in a mineral or in anything like that, it gives us ample time to get the body up to its optimal state.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. What are the common questions you get from your patients, I suppose, about this issue? Are they worried about certain things?
A lot of the women, most of the women are actually worried about, will it work, will it not work? Will my body be able to sustain a pregnancy? And they're all valid concerns. In Chinese medicine, we actually assign every single emotion to an organ. So when there's fear involved, we believe that that's actually connected to kidney energy. Kidney energy is actually involved in reproductive energy. So we're basically looking at balancing and tonifying kidney energy and kidney health to improve reproductive health.
Yep. Okay.
For example.
Yeah, no, that's great. Are there many people like you in Melbourne who do the kind of work you do?
There are many people like me worldwide,
Right.
and we are registered, and the people who, that love fertility are the ones that I would recommend you seek. There are many of us, but there are some practitioners that are really, really interested in reproductive health.
Yeah, okay. I've got a question come in here about whether you have a detoxification regime you can recommend. This woman's doing acupuncture weekly and supplements, but she wants some information on detox.
Okay, so it depends on where in the cycle you may be, but if you're, say, 3 months out of going into a program, if you can see a naturopathic doctor or a Chinese medicine doctor that is registered, Mesogenics do an amazing detoxification program that lasts between 2 and 6 weeks, depending on where you're at.
Okay, that's great. That's great. I've just got to. We will have this webinar as a recording later for those who missed bits of it now. So I've just had questions about that come in.
Okay.
All right. Look, that's great. I can't see any other questions coming in right now.
Totally.
So that's great. If can you? What's the name of your website again? Can you remind us?
My business is called The Nature of Balance, and we're in Melbourne.
Right. Okay. Great. And so, do you see people coming in just from Melbourne? Then I assume to see you, they've got to come in.
I see clients from everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, I do, and yeah, I think it's very, very important as something to boost women's health. I've seen it work time and time again. Yep.
That's great. Okay, guys, look, we might switch to the next session now. That's really good. Thank you so much, Carolina, for coming in. It's just so useful to have you here. I've loved it. It's great.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to introduce, I think, our panelists. We might go to our panel session now, I think. So I'm just going to get Elizabeth and Natalie to unmute themselves. I've got Fiorina is here. That's great. Let's start your videos. So this is one of our most popular sessions we do, is really just hearing from women who've been through the process of donor IVF. And while the conference in Melbourne will look at some women who've done it locally, this is a chance tonight to look at women who source donor eggs in other countries, because it's such a big thing that Australians do. So these women have all got their own incredible stories, and I'm really thankful that you've all agreed to come and share tonight with everybody, because they are private journeys, and it's great that you can give people the confidence to know that this can work. But I'd like to hear a little bit about how it's worked. So let me just turn to, well, actually, wait, maybe we should, we'll put it on Dr. T a bit after this. I'm just going to do the other session first. So I might start with you, Elizabeth. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey? When did you decide to sort of look at donor eggs?
Okay, so with my husband, we started trying for a baby around September 2021.
Yep.
No, 19. What am I saying? 19. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did. After 3 months, we realized that it was not gonna work naturally at all. So we approached a fertility clinic.
Yep.
And then we did 3 rounds of IVF until I think our last round was in June 2020.
Yep.
Until we decided, we didn't get anything, not even an embryo to transfer, not even an egg fertilized. So it was a disaster, really. But anyway, so from then on, we decided to try naturally again. But then I started doing acupuncture, and then it was more the natural route. So looking at the cycle and see what we could modify, adding some progesterone in the luteal phase. So we did that for around a year, and yeah, we didn't get anything either, not even a positive pregnancy test. So in July 2021, my husband just mentioned it and said, "What about donor egg?" So that didn't come from me, that came from him.
Oh, wow.
And so I started researching it because I didn't really know anything about it, and yeah, I had to really think how this is gonna work. I'm losing my DNA, etc. So I really looked into the epigenetic and did a lot of research. And then from now on, I started to ask. I was in quite a few forums, donor egg forums online on Facebook, and what was important for me is to find a donor of my ethnicity. So because I'm from the French Caribbean.
Okay.
So initially we approached Egg Donor Australia, and we put a profile together, thinking maybe we're going to find someone here. But after a month, we just realized there's no chance I'm going to find a Caribbean donor in Perth. So then I again went back to those forums and asked some of the ladies if they know any clinic overseas that has Caribbean donors, and someone replied to me and said, "Yeah, Barbados." And so from then I contacted the donor program coordinator there, and then I said to her, "We are a couple from Perth, Australia, and we're looking for a donor." And she said, "Oh, we have plenty of donor of your ethnicity here. It's basically 90% of our donor." So then we realized that was the right place.
No, it's a great story, and it does remind me that you've got to sometimes think outside the square. We do have access to donors all over the world, and a lot of people do find this hard navigating it on their own.
Exactly.
Yeah. Look, I'm just going to stop you there. We're going to come back to your story.
No problem. No problem.
I'm just going to get Dr. Chakviani to do her 15 minutes on the IVF medical issues, because I know she's got to go, and we'll come back to your stories, you guys, in a minute.
No problem.
So just pause on that. I'm going to introduce Dr. Chakviani and get her video up as well now, and she's going to talk about the medical issues. So where am I here? So this is about considerations in donor IVF. Hi, Dr. Chakviani. Thanks for coming in. I'm just going to introduce you now. So this is the IVF specialist issues now we're going to talk about. Reparat does a lot of work in donor IVF globally. And I've met with many times Dr. Chakviani. We've done lots of patient work with their clinic. So thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about these issues. That's great of you.
Thank you, Sam, for introducing us, and I want to thank you all patients for looking this video. So I want to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Tia Chakviani from Georgian American Center, Reprowork in Georgia, Tbilisi. So the Georgian American Center for Reproductive Medicine started its operation in July 2012. Clinic is specialized in all areas of female and male infertility and offers infertility solutions, including egg donation, surrogacy, and all issues of IVF ICSI procedures. Genomic is a high-tech biomedical research and genetic diagnostic center. It was established in 2020. It is in-house genetic lab, which allows to perform PGTA testing, and PGTA increase the pregnancy rate and likelihood of having a healthy baby. So here I want to show you our clinic progression. As I mentioned, we were established on 2012, and since there, 2 satellite clinics were opened in 2 biggest cities of Georgia, Kutaisi and Batumi. It was in 2014. In 2016, first live baby was born after PGTA testing, and it's up to ReproWatt team. The new clinic was built in Tbilisi in 2019. Also, ReproWatt Group opened genetic lab performing PGTA testing in 2020. And finally, last year, we got the ISO certificate. ReproWatt Clinic and Genetic Lab received ICO certificate 9001. We offer to our patients all everything we can do using the IVF treatment, to use their own genetic material, egg donation, surrogacy, sperm donation, and guaranteed baby program using also egg donation. You know that egg donation is completely known and regulated by the law. Parents can get full ID information of a donor, including data of birth, full name, education, family history. Our donors are between 19 to 30 years old, and all egg donors are karyotype tested. The selection before the donor will be offered to patient, they undergo the ultrasound examination to see how many antral follicles they have, and then we fix them into our database for donation. And as soon as patient agree and confirm that they okay to use these donors, then they completely undergo necessary examinations like karyotyping, endocrine assay, complete blood work, and physical examination. Our in-house agency, IVF2 Georgia, will provide a link and passcode of our online database of donor and surrogate database, where you can choose suitable candidate for you. Here you see the web page, but if you decide to take the donor or surrogate from our our agency, they will provide the full access to this link. Also, we always this is not mandatory, but we always recommend to do carrier screening test to donor in order to determine whether the egg donor is carries any of genetic mutation, which might widely spread and major spread in Mediterranean area, like the cystic fibrosis, beta thalassemia, fragile X. So in case if we detect that donor carries any of these mutations, then we always recommend the male partner to do the same test of genetic carrier in order to detect the compatibility of these genetic mutations. And if both of them carries the same genetic mutation, then we provide a new donor or do the PGTM testing. After the donor is examined, then we go ahead and do necessary stimulation, ovarian stimulation injection. This is a gonadotropin injection. You know this, we according to American and European protocols, we widely use the highly purified HMG or alone the recombinant FSH or the combination of those two medications. As soon as the follicle sizes reach 18 to 19 millimeter, then we fix the embryo transfer date. We always give to donor as ovulation trigger GnRH agonist in order to avoid the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, because the donors are younger and they have quite much number of follicles. And on after 35 hours after last injection, we provide and do egg retrieval. On day of egg retrieval, male partner gives us the fresh sperm. Either he arrived before the fixed procedure and freeze the sperm, or maybe we might have the frozen sperm shipped from abroad. Here you see the hatched embryo. We do perform the laser hatching on this stage, on blastocyst stage. It is day 5, day 6, day 7. We cut this few number of cells and send the lab this biopsy material to the genetic lab and wait until we get the result back. This embryo will be frozen and the biopsy sample will be sent to the genetic lab. And after we get the result back and we see that embryo is euploidy, then we preparing or intended patient for uterus, for embryo transfer, or either the surrogate mother. We can offer to our patient all scenarios of embryo transfer. It might be the donor egg can be frozen and shipped abroad if needed. Donor egg can be fertilized and frozen embryo can be shipped to abroad. Frozen embryo can be transferred to intended mother uterus, or either in uterus of surrogate mother. And we can also manage the fresh embryo transfer. In that case, we have to synchronize donor and intended patient cycle synchronization we have to do, and plan then embryo transfer. First beta HCG level from blood is done on day 10 after embryo transfer. We see the result, and the second beta HCG level, in order to see how it progressed, we do after 40 hours after first beta HCG level. So I wish you success. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you your dreams come true. If you have any questions, you can book online consultation and appointment, and you can see my details below. Thank you again.
Thanks, Dr. Chakiani. That's really helpful. Really terrific to get through that in such a good fashion. I'm so pleased to have you on. That's great. It's lovely. It's great to have had some Australian clients we've already helped with your program. That's great. Okay, let us come back now to some real stories for our mums, and we might return to Elizabeth. Natalie's here, Fiorina. So, Elizabeth, tell us a bit about, so you'd chosen the clinic in Barbados, and you did you choose your donor before you arrived there?
We didn't travel there.
Okay.
We managed to import the eggs into Western Australia.
Ah, okay. So talk us through what WA wanted to allow the eggs to be imported.
Yeah. So we so after we chose his donor, I contacted I got in touch with a local clinic to see how they could actually help us. So it was Concept Fertility in Perth. And they said, yeah, we're more than happy to coordinate that with the coordinator in Barbados. We're going to put an application together to the RTC, which is a Reproductive Technology Council. And so they meet every month and they decide whether or not we could import those eggs into Australia. So there are around 10 different criteria. The main ones were to prove that the donor was not going to be paid above a certain amount of money. The fact that she's been cancelled by a counsellor that was equivalent to Australian counsellor. She had to give her consent to donate those eggs, and then she also had to give her consent to import those eggs into overseas. Okay,
great. And how many eggs turned up into Perth?
19 eggs.
Great. And of those 19, do you remember how many embryos were made?
Yes, 9.
Oh wow, that's great. That's a great result. Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh, so was it a long process getting the import approval?
It was not actually. It was faster than we thought it was going to be. So they sent the application, I think it was April, beginning of April 2022,
Mhm.
and it was approved in 15 days.
Because I'm assuming this is a Barbados clinic was one that Concept hadn't worked with before, I assume.
They'd never worked with them before.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
because of that, we had to organize ourselves the importation as well for a special courier.
Yeah, that's right. And we do a lot of that every month for people because the courier part's complicated. Yeah. And as you know, it can be expensive too.
It was very expensive.
Yeah. But I suppose you've got to weigh up the cost of shipping versus you traveling over to Barbados back and forth.
Exactly. We
Yeah.
did the math, and that would have been much more anyway.
Okay. So the big question is, you did the first transfer and what happened?
It worked.
The first one?
It was the first transfer. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Did you agonize over your choice of donors? Was that something that you spent a lot of time looking at?
Not really. I mean, we as soon as July 2021, as soon as we set our mind to it, that was it. And then we had to have 2 compulsory counseling sessions, which happened in February and March 2022. That was just before the donor did the cycle for us in Barbados and frozen her eggs. And at that stage, we were ready. We knew that was definitely the path we wanted to follow. So we had no hesitation.
Yeah. And look, this is also, I think you were lucky at the clinic you were with in WA, because different clinics in Australia have different policies on donors and how easy they are to work with. Some clinics in Australia are quite easy to work with this, and others are really hard.
Oh, really? Wow, we didn't actually know that. Okay.
I think you were pretty lucky, yeah. All right, stay on the line. We've got questions coming in already here. Okay, so the questions come in. How did you handle the financial transactions with Barbados?
Okay, so they had a very secure portal. So the money that when we paid for those frozen eggs, that was within a secure. I mean, we were still quite anxious because that was a lot of money. I mean, I can tell you it was 17,000 Australian dollars.
Okay.
So that was a lot of money.
Sure.
We were, although we've been in touch with them for quite a few months and we built that relationship. It was a little bit nerve-wracking to send that much money overseas.
Yeah,
but
sure.
we trusted them. We knew.
Had you talked to other women online who'd used the same clinic?
Yeah, that's how I found it. Yeah, they did, but the majority are from the US and they flew to Barbados to do cycle as opposed to importing it. I think that was I don't know. I actually haven't asked them if they imported eggs to Australia. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But you judged how legitimate they were by checking out other people who'd used them. Is that right?
Yeah, and also we checked the medical director I've done a lot of conferences overseas and she's and we knew that clinic was really following also the UK legislation as well. So we knew it was reliable.
Great. Natalie, let's turn to you. It's nice to see you again after all this time.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on. Now, tell us about your journey, because it was a few years ago from memory. We'll talk about the books a bit later.
Yeah, no worries.
But tell us when you turned to donor. Were you doing lots of IVF first? What happened?
Well, I hadn't been doing any IVF when I started. I came off the pill in 2015, and so that was December 2015, and then in March of 2016, I was sitting, it's weird, I still remember to this day, I was sitting just in my spare bedroom doing some kind of life admin, and I just had this hot flush just came and went, and I just knew then this is not good. That's something I immediately knew something obviously wasn't right. Now, I had just come off the pill and obviously had started trying for a family. So I knew at my age, at 40, was probably going to be a little bit difficult, would potentially need IVF, but nowhere did I think, that I would be in perimenopause. So I went to the doctors, had some blood work done, and the results came back saying that I was in perimenopause. So because I was only 41, I don't have any sisters, they were trying to kind of ascertain, well, that's very young to be in menopause. Like what, you know, what was the family history? And my dad is a Vietnam veteran, so they think that potentially my egg reserve was affected through Agent Orange.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I was very late when I started my periods, like I was 17, and obviously they think that the pill had probably been masking my symptoms. So even though I was 40 when I came off the pill, I potentially could have been in perimenopause a few years before that.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I ended up doing so I had an AMH. I had less than 1% left of my egg reserve. So I did 2 rounds of IVF. So I had to go on trisequence to get my FSH levels down, because they were obviously they were sky high, because my body was already in perimenopause. And yeah, basically I didn't respond. So I did 1 cycle, got cancelled because nothing happened. Then I did another cycle after that. I think I had a month's break, then I did another cycle, and again it got cancelled. So they said, we can do a 3rd round if you like, but after 2 rounds, because there's been no response and literally with less than 1% left, like I knew that was it, that it was donor eggs straight away.
Yeah. And so you were, was it easy to come to terms with donor eggs for you then?
Yes, it was. And knowing a lot of women, like, I'm actually glad that happened, because I never got on the merry-go-round of IVF with my own eggs. Yeah. So it was as sad as it was to know, wow, you know, I've got to do this alternate path of family bearing, going through donor eggs. It actually saved me, I reckon, from thousands and thousands of dollars, because
that's right.
I wasn't on this merry-go-round of just one more go. It was like, this is your only way to go and have your family.
Elizabeth talked about, she chose a clinic because she wanted a certain racial mix, obviously. How did you choose where to go for donor?
So my fertility specialist here in Melbourne had literally been to a seminar over in America, and she said, if you can afford the money back guarantee, she did recommend a clinic over in San Diego. And she said, you know, it is really expensive, and I think we worked it out, it was going to be like $50,000-$60,000 for the guarantee program. She said, alternatively, go to Cape Town and go to Cape Fertility, which is the clinic that, you know, a lot of Australian women go to in South Africa.
Okay, and you went to Cape?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. And tell us what they're like.
They are actually really amazing. So the egg donor agencies are actually separate from the clinic. Right. So this was like about, you know, in 2017 when I first went over there. So essentially you make you connect with the clinic. They send you all the forms and all the blood work and the scans and stuff that you need to do. And then there is about a dozen agencies, egg donor agencies, that you go and select your egg donor from. So I mean, initially it did feel a bit weird, because it is a little bit like online shopping. You know, I want the blue-eyed, blonde-haired donor. So that did initially feel a bit weird, but then once you start reading the profiles of the women, and you get, obviously it's all anonymous in South Africa, so you only get baby photos or toddler photos. But the women, you know, they do write very detailed profiles. So my donor was a first-time donor. She had never donated before, and she was in Durban. But she kind of hadn't elected to travel. Obviously, I was traveling to Cape Town, and I kept looking at all these other pictures, but I just was drawn to how she articulated herself. Like, we both read crime novels. You know, she loved peas. You know, no, she didn't like peas, and neither did my husband, yet my son eats them frozen from the freezer. So there was just so many similarities between me and this woman. I just kept getting drawn back to her. And I just reached out to the clinic and I said, look, I would love to choose this donor. Is she available to travel? And she was. So she was fortunate enough to work in the legal industry. They had a law firm also based in Cape Town, so she could fly down to do the treatment without any disruption.
Yeah, wow. And so did you look at a number of different donor companies before you decided?
So I looked at 2 or 3 different egg donor agencies.
Yep.
And I just kept getting drawn back to the one egg donor agency that I selected the donor from.
Okay. And does the IVF clinic put you in touch with the donor agency? Is that how it works?
Yes, so the clinic would put you in contact or list the kind of dozen egg donor agencies. It is a little bit different now because they have kind of their own in-house agency as such. So you, when you register now, they have a woman who's like the kind of egg donor coordinator, and she will send you profiles. But what I like about the agencies is that you log in and you choose rather than sending photos and they kind of select the profiles for you. So, I mean, it works a little bit the same, except they have access to their own internal database, and you kind of wait for them to send the photos and the profiles through.
So she flew down, and I assume she did extracted eggs and they made the embryo straight away?
Yep, fresh transfer.
Fresh transfer, yep, okay.
Yep.
How many did you guys make? Do you remember?
Yep. So we got 14. So we got 14 eggs. 12 were mature for fertilization.
Yep.
And then we got 10 fertilized. We got 6 at day 3. And then we only got 3 at day 5.
Okay. Wow. Wow.
Yep. Yeah.
Did the doctor Chuck Biani before mention this genetic carrier screening? Did you or Elizabeth do this carrier screening stuff you can do on the donor?
No, we just the normal. The only additional test that I got with the donor was her AMH level.
Okay, yeah. So you had 3. You were there?
Yep. So I put 2 embryos back.
Yep.
And I ended up having a heteroptic pregnancy.
What's that mean?
So that's where one embryo implants in the uterus and one in the fallopian tube.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's really rare. It does happen more in cases of IVF.
Right.
So like literally so you stay in South Africa for 12 days and then you come home and then obviously you do your blood work.
Yep.
So I was only, I had a positive pregnancy test. I was only 5 weeks and 3 days and I ended up having this massive bleed, ended up having to go to emergency. So I hadn't even had my 6-week scan. So I was just confirmed pregnancy with my HCG doubling as I was having the blood work. Ended up having to go to emergency. They did a scan. They said, "Oh, you're pregnant with twins. Just one's in the fallopian tube and one's in the uterus. So we need to remove the ectopic pregnancy." And then I obviously had that removed and then had my son, who's now 5.
Wow.
From the uterine pregnancy.
Oh my God. Was it hard, that initial news you got that there was one they're going to have to sort of take out? Is that?
I think, obviously you worry then about the uterine pregnancy, right? Because sometimes what happens, and I was very lucky that it had been picked up early, that the bleed had happened because it was already over nearly a litre of blood circulating around my fallopian tube. So had it not if I'd not had any symptoms and it waited, it probably would have burst the following week. And then I potentially could have lost the uterine pregnancy as well. So I was very lucky in that regard. And, you do sometimes wonder, would it have been a boy or a girl, or, what would that child have looked like with my son? But then I'm, very grateful and thankful that, the uterine pregnancy worked and I have my son.
Yeah, wow. And how old's your son now?
So he's 5. So he just started school this year. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What a journey, God. And is there still an embryo left in South Africa then?
There is, but we did go back in August last year for a frozen transfer, and it didn't work, unfortunately.
Right. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Which can happen, man.
Yeah.
What did you decide to stop then, or is there still hope for another one?
So in South Africa, the donors can only donate 6 times. So that's the maximum number they can donate. So my donor has already donated 6 times. So I can't choose the same donor. I would have to start a complete new cycle.
Yep, got it. Yeah, a bit like in Australia.
Yeah.
Fiorina, hello, welcome. Thanks for coming on. Tell us a bit about your story. You got to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about your story.
Mine's a little bit different because I'm much older,
Yep.
And I sort of started this journey 46, 47.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, you know, try everything. We ended up having a darling little girl via surrogacy egg donor,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, a gestational carrier. And, you know, we ended up in America. I found it, for me personally, I wanted, I did mourn that sort of genetic loss, as, you know, women go through. And, you know, I wanted her to have, you know, the baby to be, you know, sort of a little bit representative of me, like to be, you know, dark, olive, like sort of have a bit of Italian heritage, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so in America, we, you know, we went through a donor concierge, and, you know, it's a bizarre process, as you know, to go through it, like what you look for and what sort of comes to you. But at the end of the day, it's an instinct and a feeling and a small trigger that you resonate with. And you know, it was, I sort of struggled a bit with all the genetic sort of mourning and stuff, I called it. But the irony is, like, honestly, my daughter is so fair and so she looks exactly like her father. And, you know, I was a bit hung up. I wanted her to be a bit olive, a bit, you know, dark, or something relatable, you know. And she just looks like her father 1,000,000,000%. So
yeah.
And
did you guys partner later in life? What?
Yes, yeah, we met at 46.
Yeah, right.
So
Right.
it was, yeah.
And were you single before that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting. I get a number of women coming to me in their mid-40s saying, "I'm still single. I'm sick of waiting for Mr. Right. Just to help me have a baby."
Yeah.
So at least you were able to wait, and it would work, which is great.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you worry about bonding when your bubba was born, because you wasn't genetically related and you hadn't carried your bubba? Was that a concern you had?
Like, I did, but not for long, to be honest. I really I felt like a crazy person how much I wanted to be a mother, like that I just wouldn't let it go. Like, I feel like it was just such a strange feeling. Like, I was really going against all the odds, starting fertility at 47. I did my transfer at 48. I mean, it didn't work the first time. The second time I got pregnant for 3 weeks, which...
This is using your own eggs or donor eggs?
No, this is all donor.
Okay, so you did try doing... How many transfers did you do into your own body? Which didn't work.
Just one.
One. Okay.
Just, yeah.
Right. Was it a...
Sorry, Sam, just to go back to the bonding. I just, when I held her, I understood why I had gone through everything I'd gone through. And I still feel that. I still feel like just no wonder why I wanted to be a mother. Like, it makes sense to me. Like, I never feel like I've not bonded, or, I mean, we don't look the same, but the love, just the love, it's never been an issue ever.
Yeah. What about disclosure to your friends that you used a donor? Was that something that you were reticent to do, or do people ask, or do they just assume? Or
I feel like, just having gone through this, people don't really understand what donor means, or like even the extra layer with having a surrogate that is not the genetic material. So it's sort of like this, I just say our baby was made by a village, and just sort of and people are curious. So, and I've been really open about it, and really just because at any, it was this or nothing, and at every turn, that's what helped me get to where I am today. That it was, you know, it's donor egg or nothing, or in my case, it was surrogacy or nothing. So, yeah, it's been, I've been very open about it, and
And was your egg donor also anonymous?
She was anonymous. We had, in America, you get very, very detailed history, like medical records, photos. Like it's quite an extensive sort of profile.
Yeah, sure. Elizabeth, for you, you had to have an ID release donor. Does that mean you're in touch with your donor, or does it happen later?
No, so she agreed to release her details. So when our son is 16, he has to do counseling. I think that's what I understand before, and then he will be able to access her details. Yeah, that was the condition of us. We'll never be able to import it.
Okay, got it. A question has come in from the audience here about, can you guys share your journey of starting IVF at an older age, you know, with regards to medical complications, risks of that during the pregnancy, to you guys carrying a baby, you know, when you were older? Did that worry you?
Yeah, personally, yes. It really was very stressful for me.
Yeah.
And also at the back of my mind was, every day felt like a month, like every second is accounted for in fertility when you're older.
Yeah.
Like when you're told that you have to wait another cycle or another 3 months, it's just a form of torture. So
sure. Natalie, you must have carried your boy when you were over 40, I think, was it?
Yeah, I was 43. You know, and that's why I think for me and the menopause, like I wasn't on that train of waiting every month. So I'm actually really thankful. I know it was still early, but I'm thankful I didn't have to, you know, when I read in forums of the pain women are going through at 43, 44 and still doing, you know, IVF with their own eggs. But no, I had literally a textbook pregnancy. Besides the heterotic pregnancy initially, obviously at the beginning, you know, I carried to term. You know, I breastfed my son till he was 2. So yes, my eggs were rubbish. Milk I had loads of. So I had a really easy pregnancy. And I think because I'm actually quite fit and active, and I'd never been pregnant before, so this was literally my first pregnancy. I just had the mindset that I had to trust my body, that it knew what to do once it was pregnant, and let it do what it needed to do, you know, rather than, I guess, from my perspective, feeling anxious about, you know, every stage of the pregnancy. I mean, you still do get anxious when you've been through infertility, waiting, you know, for that first kick, and then waiting for all those other kicks in your stomach, and making sure, you know, that all those milestones are met when you're pregnant. But otherwise, yeah, no, I didn't have any complications at all within my pregnancy.
That's great. Elizabeth, what about you?
I was 45 when I fell pregnant, and I had him on 2nd of March, and my OB was quite concerned I was going to have quite a few complications. She was listing all those potential complications to me. She sent me to a dietitian early on, to another cardiovascular specialist. She just made sure everything was ticked, and I actually had 0 complications. So I didn't even have gestational diabetes, so that was great.
Yeah.
Were you much more tired, do you think, during pregnancy than a younger woman would have been?
I was very tired. I'm a high school teacher, so it was a bit rough the first 2 trimester. Plus, I was nauseous from the beginning to the end. That's the only thing I had to deal with. But apart from that, I mean, I exercised. I was doing Pilates, hydrotherapy towards the end, so I was able to exercise towards the end. So it was good.
Yeah, great. Look, what tips would you give other women who are considering donor IVF? What kind of things should they be thinking about?
I think, and I have a little bit of a saying, my saying is keep your eye on the prize. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of women have bonding, they have those kind of thoughts. But I just think no woman says, I want a biological child. And moving over to loss of genetics was what I'm looking for. No woman sets out to say, I want a biological child. We set out to say we want a child or we want to be a mum. Yep. So the genetics part of it, this is just obviously my opinion, really plays no part, because no one sets out to say, I want a genetic child. You just want a child. We just want to experience motherhood. We want to be a mum. And so keep your eye on the prize of what that means. And, you don't have to always go down the path of continually trying with your own eggs, because the donor eggs is going to give you a much better success rate, as we know, when our eggs, the health decline of those eggs. And I don't think I've ever met one woman that has said, I've struggled bonding with my child. I just never come across those women, because they have wanted motherhood for such a long time that they're so happy that they have their baby.
Yeah. No, it's very true. I mean, I do get a lot of women coming to me saying, I've done, 8 rounds of IVF, I've done 12 transfers. And the doctors in Australia, unfortunately, will let you keep going and keep going, without stopping you, because it's a money-making business, unfortunately, in Australia, and they're profit-making businesses, so they want to keep the business coming in. And I suppose they think if a woman's prepared to keep spending money, we'll take her money.
Yeah.
Luckily, you didn't have to go through the hassle yourself, thank God. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of health risks as well that are coming through, that rounds and rounds of IVF are so destructive at the end of the day. Like it's like it takes its toll on women, the hormones, the up and downs. It's a lot to deal with. Yeah,
sure. Natalie, what inspired you to write the book about telling your kids? Tell us a bit about that book.
Oh, the books. So during lockdown, and I'm going to say
2020?
That was 2021. So I know we had a few here in Melbourne, but the first main big lockdown, I started researching. I think my son was 2, so I started researching, okay, books. I need to start, telling his story to him, even, and so that was part of his DNA growing up. And I purchased some books overseas, or just from Amazon. And predominantly all the books were written by US authors. So initially I did actually look here in Australia. I'm like, when you're part of the donor egg or donor conception community, you don't realize how big it is until you're in there, and you're like, wow, there has to be an Australian author that's written, children's books to help explain, their journey. And literally, I could not believe that there were none. So I ordered a couple from Amazon, and they were okay, but then they were written in the US, and the grammar was different. And only a couple of those books were actually written by women who had experienced infertility and had children conceived by donor eggs. Right. So during lockdown, I wrote together a bit of a poem. I thought it can't be that hard to write a book. And so I kind of wrote this poem, and I started sharing it to my friends, and they were all like, oh, where did you get this? Did you buy this online? I was like, no, I wrote it. And they were like, oh, this is amazing. You should totally publish this. And so then, just had it, got a rhyming editor, then found an illustrator. And then, just kind of put it all together. I had a lot of test readers to make sure that, although it was my story, I wanted people to purchase the book so that it could become their story, so that they would have the talk track of, how am I going to tell my child that they're donor conceived? And it's kind of snowballed from that, really. So I did the first book, which was egg donation for couples. Mm-hmm. And then last year for Mother's Day, I published 2 books for single mums, one that used their own eggs, and then the other book was for mums that use double donor, because I know a lot of women that have in my community here in Melbourne that have used double donor
Yeah,
sperm.
we're seeing a lot of it too now.
Yeah, so that's basically where it started. So I'm writing some books at the moment, hopefully for Father's Day, for couples that are using donor sperm and then double donors. And then I'm also going to do some books for families of colour, because there are literally no books for women of colour. So Elizabeth,
Thank you.
there's no books. Like, what are you doing?
No.
How are these families telling their children? Like, why should they use a book for Caucasian families? They should have books for their background. And so that's also on my list to do.
Yeah, great.
I'm looking forward to see it.
Yeah. I might need you, so we should connect.
Can I ask you guys, how useful are the egg donor forums, or were they when you were first trying to research this stuff?
How did we find
for
them?
me, sorry.
Elizabeth, you go.
You go, Elizabeth. Yeah.
For me personally, that was essential. This is where I receive all the information in a fairly safe place, and I also found a group who was donor egg for women of color. So it's based in America as well. So that was just essential for me to be on those forums, and I'm very grateful that I did.
Yeah. And Natalie, for you, was it useful?
Yeah, so I was also part of some egg donor Facebook groups, and the groups are initially amazing, I think, when you're at the very beginning of your journey, but the groups are as only good as the people in the groups, right? Because that's kind of what makes the groups work with information. And so we meet up quite regularly here in Melbourne. So every other month we're doing a dinner, catching up, connecting with other women through Instagram. So just really providing support and helping. So they are knowledgeable, but I think you've got to make sure you've got the members in there that have been through the journey and have the knowledge as well to help the new people coming in.
Of course, yeah. Irina, for you, how did you choose your IVF clinic in the USA?
It was through just making phone calls, like speaking to the actual doctors.
Right.
I spoke to about 3.
Yep.
I had a couple of recommendations. They weren't a great fit, and it was just me Googling and ringing doctors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you wanted to speak to the doctors, on the phone yourself. Yeah.
Look, I did. I was always in a bit of disbelief that I was going to become a mother at my age, and so I just really wanted someone who was sincere and really wasn't going to just slam the doors in my face that were kind of happening in Australia, and I just wanted that connection as well.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting. I'm thinking a lot of women now coming to us for help when they're sort of late 40s, even 50, having a baby for the first time. Some are siblings, but often it's first time, and sometimes they just, didn't get round to it, didn't find a partner or whatever. I mean, at least at that older age, they've often got some money behind them to be able to afford it. But others don't. Any other tips for you give people who are embarking on this process?
What I would say is, I think when you start like that, all those different, doing IVF, you need to really decide how far you prepare to go. So it's how many cycles you prepare to do with your own eggs until you decide it's not working. And then when you decide to stop, what else am I prepared to do? For some people, doing their own eggs and it's not working, that would be the end. For other people, they're ready to go on to the donor egg path. For other people, it's surrogacy. So people just need to ask themselves those questions: how far am I prepared to go for this?
Yeah.
And I think as well, know your cutoff. Like, what's your cutoff? Like with your own eggs, what are you giving yourself? 3 cycles, 5 cycles, 12 months, whatever that is. But then also leave no stone unturned.
Yes.
So if the first transfer doesn't work, or the second transfer, especially if you're traveling internationally, leave no stone unturned. So if after the second transfer it hasn't worked, then, you know, be strong enough to say to your fertility specialist here in Australia, we need to do further testing, because there's no point in going back a third time on the third protocol, which is the same as the first and the second transfer, that hasn't worked.
Yeah,
So
I think that's really good advice. Yeah, because what we do find in Australia is often the doctors don't do enough testing. For the reasons why it's not working. And now we get patients who go overseas, they say, my God, I've had so much extra tests done when I go overseas. Why didn't this happen in Australia?
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I forget what you said about your IVF before donor. Did you do much IVF first?
We did 3 cycles, and then that was our cutoff. So the first cycle was cancelled because I didn't respond to anything. The second one, I think which I ovulated before, so got no egg. And the third one, I only have 1 egg that didn't fertilize. So it was not great.
That's right. Yeah. Natalie, we might read out that question for people, because that'll be interesting for other people, about whether or not your fertility specialist here in Australia was willing to communicate with South Africa or not.
Yep. So they didn't actually communicate directly with my clinic in South Africa. Right. So essentially, all they did, so I got the protocol from Cape Fertility, and then gave it to my fertility specialist, but she did things like a hysteroscopy. I got tested for natural killer cells prior to my transfer, or prior to going over. So I had elevated MKC, so I was already on the Bondi protocol. So that was tested prior to going over. So I guess I was lucky in that my fertility specialist here, she left no stone unturned to make sure that I wasn't going over, you know, for a wasted trip, essentially. So
yeah, but she was comfortable with supporting your trip over, supporting you.
Yeah, well, she recommended going over to Cape Fertility. Yeah, so she recommended to go over. So I essentially had, I would say, basic immune testing before I went over. You know, I didn't need it. And that was kind of enough, I guess. I went over and I came back, I came back pregnant. So what the testing I had done here worked prior to going over to South Africa. Yeah. So I think you still need to act as the conduit between the clinic and your fertility specialist here in Melbourne. I don't think they're going to relate or going to go directly to talk to the doctor. But at least then they will push for further testing if you need to, because the clinic in South Africa actually does the same protocol for everyone. So they actually don't change the protocol. You need to go to your fertility specialist here in Australia to push for further answers if, you know, your transfers fail or things like that.
Right. Fiorina, your journey was obviously much more complicated because you had a surrogate involved at a distance, a long way away. Did it make you very anxious being so far away from the pregnancy while it was happening?
Anxious, yes. Because I'd had so many no's, we kept it quiet for about 4 or 5 months. And then I felt safer when I spoke to counsellors, I spoke to people, whatever would come up for me, I would go and speak to someone or do a bit of acupuncture to calm down, because I was so far away from LA. And, you know, it really, but my surrogate, she's a darling. We're still in contact, and she would help me so often, you know, like sort of calm me down. And, but it was just, you have to let go somewhere as well. Otherwise you become cuckoo. So I really feel like we were a really good match, and she was a darling. So it helped me a lot.
I think that's really good advice about being able to let go, because this is a trust exercise, trusting your IVF clinic and your donor or your surrogate. Because, you know, many of us on this webinar, we realise our body can't do what it needs to do. We have to outsource something, or more than one thing. And just being able to put the trust in other people to help here, rather than trying to second guess everything and lose sleep over it all. All right, look, that's great. I can't see any other questions coming in. I mean, what was I suppose my last question for you guys before we wrap up is sort of, what was the hardest thing about the process for you?
Other than the money,
Yes, that's right.
other than the crazy money,
Yeah.
For me personally, it was like just really staying in that faith, like really just staying in that trust that this baby is coming to you for the right reason, that this is your child coming to you, and the joy is, you know, just unbeatable. So that was something that, after coming out of the fertility black hole, when we were pregnant, and just it was just staying in that good faith that it's here, it's happened, all the hard work's paid off.
Yeah.
You know.
Elizabeth, what about for you?
For us, I think I'm going to join Fiorina. We had to send quite a lot of money overseas, so that was a bit nerve-wracking for us. We really had to trust every single of those organization and trust that they were going to do the right thing by us. So trust.
Yeah. Good point. All right, look, guys, thank you so much. That's great. Really good to have you sharing your stories tonight. It's so valuable for people to know that this can happen, and there are ways to make this happen. I've been lots of thank you messages coming in already from people, so that's just wonderful. As I said before, for people who are in Melbourne, there's a donor day on 17 June for lots of donors and parents via donation talking as well, doctors and all kinds of things. So that'll be, and also some of the older kids born by donation talking about that side of things, because, you know, obviously they have a say in this too when they're growing up about, you know, what they think. And I know when we had our donor kids with surrogacy, you know, we decided to tell them from an early age. But getting their heads around it when they're young is hard, because, you know, they don't even understand the biology of what's the difference between a donor and a surrogate and stuff. So it does take a bit of a while. But picture books are great. Books like Natalie's are great. Helps them along the way. So thank you all. That's been great. Okay. Terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks, Verena.
Thank you for having us.
Sam. Yeah, thank you so much.
That's great.
Thank
really
you.
good to have you. All right.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.